This is a rare Ethiopian Orthodox Bible manuscript, handwritten in Ethiopia's sacred liturgical language. It's 52 leaves, 102 pages, carefully preserved.
High up in the clouds of Ethiopia, hidden in a stone monastery, sits a Bible unlike any you've ever seen.
These handwritten illustrations are sacred art that connects directly to the devotion of the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition. This isn't a reprint. This is the real piece of Ethiopia's Christian heritage.
It's older, it's bigger, and it contains words that were erased from our history books. We're talking about what Jesus said after he rose from the dead. Secrets about the universe and our future that the rest of the world wasn't supposed to hear. It's raw. It's shocking, and it's been waiting for you to find it. The secret dialogue. So, here's the thing. Most of us grew up with the version of the story where Jesus rises from the dead, says a few encouraging words to his friends, and then floats up into the clouds. It's a clean ending. But the Ethiopian Bible, specifically texts like the Book of the Resurrection and the Clementine Liturgy, tells a version that is way more sci-fi than Sunday school. In these pages, the post-resurrection Jesus isn't just a ghost or a man. He is described as a being of pure, vibrating light. And he didn't come back just to say, "Don't worry." He came back to give his followers a literal masterclass on how the universe actually works. Imagine the scene. The disciples are hiding in a locked room, terrified and confused. Suddenly, Jesus appears, but he's different. The Ethiopian texts describe him as clothed in the sun. He sits them down and explains that the physical world we see is basically just a shadow. He starts talking about something called the light body. He tells them that every human being has a physical shell, but inside that shell is a complex energy system that is capable of traveling through different dimensions. This isn't just spiritual talk, it's framed like a set of instructions. He's telling them that the resurrection wasn't just a miracle for him. It was a demonstration of a potential that exists inside everyone. He describes the human soul not as a misty cloud, but as a structure of light that has to be tuned like an instrument to survive the journey after death. The shocking part? Jesus gets incredibly specific about the mechanics of the soul. He tells the apostles that the mind is the rudder of the spirit. If the mind is heavy with earthly attachments, what he calls the weight of the world, the soul becomes too dense to rise. It's almost like he's describing spiritual gravity. He tells them that the words he spoke before his death were just the milk. But now, he is giving them the solid food. This secret dialogue is focused on one major theme: liberation. He explains that the world is governed by archons or powers that try to keep human consciousness trapped in a loop of suffering and rebirth. By revealing these secrets, he is essentially giving them the cheat codes to break out of the system. The apostles are floored. They ask him, "Lord, how can we, who are flesh, follow you into the light?" And his answer is wild. He tells them they have to die before they die. He isn't talking about physical suicide, obviously. He's talking about a deep, meditative detachment where you realize you aren't your body. He describes a process of unclothing the soul from its ego. In the Ethiopian tradition, this is known as the secret wisdom that was too intense for the masses. It was reserved for those who were ready to see the hidden sun. He speaks about the abtelwa, or the transformation of the senses, where a person begins to hear the music of the spheres and see the grids of light that hold the stars in place. It's a cosmic, expanded version of Christ that feels much more like a galactic teacher than a traditional preacher. He's preparing them for a war of consciousness, telling them that the real battle isn't against Rome, it's against the illusions of the material world itself. But the conversation didn't stop at the soul. Jesus started describing where we go next, beyond the grave. If you think the light body talk was intense, wait until you hear where Jesus said we actually go when the heart stops beating. In the Ethiopian texts, the afterlife isn't just a gate with a guy holding a clipboard. It's described more like a vast, multi-layered cosmic highway. Jesus begins to map out the dimensions of the great beyond for his disciples. And honestly, it sounds a lot more like a map of the multiverse than anything you'd hear in a standard sermon. He tells them that the moment the spirit leaves the body, it doesn't just poof into heaven. Instead, it enters a series of midst places, or stations. These are essentially different frequencies of reality that the soul has to pass through, and each one is crazier than the last. Jesus describes these stations as being guarded by keepers. Now, don't picture angels with harps. These keepers are described in the Ethiopian scrolls as massive, terrifying intelligences that challenge the soul. They aren't there to be mean. They act like filters. If your soul is still vibrating at the frequency of fear, anger, or greed, you can't pass through to the higher levels. You get stuck in these lower dimensions until you learn to let go. Jesus explicitly tells his followers that he has cleared a path through these layers, but he warns them that they have to know the signs and the seals to make the transition. He describes these seals as specific states of consciousness, mental keys that unlock the doors between worlds. It's a very active, almost athletic view of the afterlife. You aren't a passive observer. You are a traveler navigating a complex territory. The most shocking part of this revelation is what Jesus says about the outer darkness. In the Standard Bible, that's just a metaphor for hell. But in the Ethiopian Apocrypha, Jesus describes it as a literal place in the cosmos, a void without form that exists outside the grid of light. He tells the disciples that some souls get lost in this void because they forgot who they were. They became so obsessed with their physical lives that they lost their inner compass. He describes the abyss not as a pit of fire, but as a state of total sensory deprivation and confusion. To avoid this, Jesus gives them a series of pylon names. He tells them that when they encounter the guardians of the various heavens, they are to speak certain truths about their divine origin. It's like a spiritual passport. He's basically saying, when you get to the third level of the fifth heaven, tell them you are a child of the living light, and they must let you pass. He also talks about the treasury of light. This is the ultimate destination, a place where individuality doesn't disappear, but expands to become one with the Creator. But here's the kicker. Jesus mentions that he has already established dwelling places there for them. This isn't just a metaphor for a house in the sky. He's talking about specific energetic signatures that he has anchored in the higher dimensions so that his followers have a docking station when they arrive. It's a very technical, structured view of eternity. He even mentions that the stars are the chariots of the righteous, suggesting that the celestial bodies we see in the night sky are actually the manifestations of these higher dimensional realms. The disciples are terrified, asking if anyone can actually make it through such a gauntlet. Jesus looks at them and says something that should be written in gold. The door is not locked from the outside. It is locked from within. He's telling them that the only thing keeping them from the highest heaven is their own belief in their limitations. It's a message of radical empowerment that makes the standard sit and wait for judgment narrative look like a fairy tale. You have to wonder, if this was so important, why did the rest of the world delete it? The hidden canon. To understand why these mind-bending secrets were kept in Ethiopia while the rest of the world lost them, you have to look at the history. But not the boring stuff you learned in school. We're talking about a massive global delete mission. Back in the 4th century, the Roman Empire decided they wanted a standard Bible. They gathered a bunch of bishops at the Council of Nicaea and basically played a high-stakes game of keep or toss. Anything that sounded too mystical, too cosmic, or too empowering for the average person was tossed into the heresy bin. The Romans wanted a religion they could use to run an empire, and a Jesus who teaches you how to navigate the multiverse doesn't exactly help you collect taxes or keep people in line. But Ethiopia was a different story. Because of its rugged mountainous landscape and its fierce independence, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church was like a spiritual time capsule. They didn't get the memo from Rome, or if they did, they ignored it. While European monks were busy scrubbing dangerous texts from history, the monks in the Ethiopian highlands were carefully hand-copying the Garima Gospels, some of the oldest illustrated Christian manuscripts in existence. They didn't see the Book of Enoch or the Ascension of Isaiah as weird extras. To them, these were the essential missing pieces of the puzzle. They believed that if you remove the cosmic context of Jesus, you're left with a hollowed-out story that doesn't actually help the soul. The result is a Bible that is massive. While your standard Bible has 66 books, the Ethiopian version has 81. Those 15 extra books are where the good stuff is hidden. They contain the details of the 40 days Jesus spent on earth after his resurrection, a period that the Western Bible glosses over in just a few verses. In Ethiopia, this isn't fringe stuff. It's the heart of their faith. These books survived Islamic conquests, Italian invasions, and the passage of centuries because the people believed these words held a literal, physical power. They treated these scrolls like high-tech blueprints for the spirit, guarding them in monasteries perched on cliffs that require a rope climb just to reach. Why was the rest of the world so afraid of these texts? Because they change the power dynamic. If Jesus is just a judge who lives in the sky, you need a church and a priest to talk to him for you. But if Jesus is a cosmic guide who gave you the keys of the kingdom and explained the layout of the dimensions, you don't need a middleman. You just need the knowledge. Ethiopia held on to that knowledge. They kept the uncensored Jesus alive, tucked away in the cold mountain air, waiting for a time when the world was actually ready to hear the truth again. They weren't just preserving books. They were preserving a bridge to the stars that the rest of the world burned down. It wasn't just history they preserved, though it was a toolkit for the afterlife. The power of the Word. In the Ethiopian tradition, Jesus didn't just give his disciples information. He gave them tools. Think of it like this. If Section 3 was the map of the afterlife, Section 5 is the survival kit. The Ethiopian scrolls, particularly the liturgy of the Gospel, suggest that Jesus taught his followers specific words of power, or holy names, that were meant to be spoken aloud. In the West, we're taught that prayer is just talking to God. But in these ancient texts, Jesus describes prayer as a form of spiritual technology. He tells the apostles that sound itself is a bridge between the physical and the spiritual. By vibrating certain sounds, a person could literally shield their light body from the negative influences of the lower dimensions. This sounds a lot like what we find in Eastern traditions with mantras, but here it's coming straight from the mouth of Christ in a first-century context. Jesus explains that the universe was spoken into existence, the Logos, or the Word, and therefore certain words carry the resonance of that original creation. He teaches them specific names for the Father that are not found in the standard Greek or Latin translations. These aren't just titles like Lord or King. They are phonetic keys. The Ethiopian monks believe that when Jesus breathed on the disciples after the resurrection, he wasn't just giving them a blessing. He was literally tuning their vocal cords to be able to speak these words of power. The shocking part of this is how practical Jesus makes it. He tells them that when they feel fear, they should vibrate a specific name to shatter the shadow. He describes the human heart as a resonator, and if you speak the right word, you can change the frequency of your entire being in an instant. This is a far cry from the passive, quiet prayer most of us are used to. This is active, energetic warfare. Jesus warns that the keepers of the gates in the afterlife respond to these sounds because the sounds themselves are the seal of the Son. It's almost like a biometric scan. If your soul can't produce the sound of love and truth, the gates simply won't open. Furthermore, the Ethiopian texts claim Jesus taught them how to use the Word to heal the physical body by aligning it with the Spirit. He tells them that sickness is just a discordant note in the body's song. By speaking the names of the luminous ones, the disciples could bring a person's energy back into harmony with the source. This explains why the Ethiopian church has such a massive emphasis on Debtera, or traditional healers who use prayer scrolls and chanted incantations. They aren't just being superstitious. They are practicing a very specific type of vocal science they believe Jesus left behind. He also warns them about the empty words, words spoken without intent or heart. He says that the powers of the air feed on empty words and gossip because it creates a leak in the soul's energy. To protect themselves, the disciples were taught to keep a secret word in their hearts at all times. This word acted like an anchor, keeping them connected to the treasury of light, even while they were walking around in the busy, chaotic physical world. It was a way to stay in the world, but not of it. Jesus makes it clear, your mouth is a portal. You are either speaking life and opening doors to the higher realms, or you are speaking death and locking yourself in the basement of reality. But while the words were powerful, the timing was everything. What was he doing during those 40 missing days? The missing 40 days. In the standard New Testament, the time between the resurrection and the ascension is a bit of a blur. We get a few sightings, a fish breakfast on the beach, and then, poof, he's gone. But in the Ethiopian tradition, those 40 days are the most important part of the entire story. They don't see it as a goodbye tour. They see it as an intensive special forces training camp for the soul. According to texts like the Kebra Nagast and the Epistula Apostolorum, Jesus used this time to take the disciples on what can only be described as astral field trips. He wasn't just sitting in a room talking, he was showing them the architecture of the cosmos. The Ethiopian scrolls suggest that during these 40 days, Jesus actually transported the apostles to different realms. He took them to the place of the foundations and showed them how the physical world is woven together by threads of light. This wasn't just a visual aid, it was a lesson in how to manifest reality. He taught them that the kingdom of heaven isn't a place you go to after you die. It's a state of being you bring into this world. During this period, Jesus is said to have explained the secrets of the 7 heavens, detailing the specific vibration and purpose of each one. He was essentially giving them a bird's-eye view of the entire creation, so they would never be afraid of death or worldly power again. The shocking revelation here is that Jesus supposedly told them he had to visit other worlds as well. The Ethiopian texts hint at a universal Christ, whose mission wasn't limited to earth. He spoke about other sheep that weren't just from other nations, but from other folds entirely, which some modern researchers interpret as other planetary systems or dimensions. This makes the 40 days look like a massive diplomatic mission across the multiverse. He was closing portals, opening gates, and ensuring that the path back to the source was clear for all sentient life, not just humans. While the apostles were being schooled in cosmic physics, Jesus was also giving them the rules of the new covenant. This wasn't a list of "thou shalt nots." Instead, it was a set of instructions on how to maintain their light frequency in a world that would try to dim it. He told them that the 40 days were a period of consecration, where their very DNA, to use a modern term, was being altered by his presence. In the Ethiopian church, this is why the number 40 is so sacred. It's the time required for a total spiritual transformation. But there was a catch. Jesus warned them that once he ascended, a great forgetting would sweep over the earth. He knew that the powers of this world would try to hide the things he had taught them during these 40 days. He told the apostles that they would be the living keepers of the fire, and that their job wasn't just to start a religion, but to keep the portal of the heart open for future generations. He even gave them a glimpse into the far future, predicting a time when the stones would cry out, and these hidden truths would be rediscovered. He was preparing them for a long game, a war of information that would last for millennia. By the time the 40th day arrived, the disciples weren't just followers anymore. They were masters of the way, equipped with a knowledge that made the Roman Empire look like a playground. The men were ready, but there was one person who held a secret even the apostles didn't fully grasp: Mary Magdalene's role. If the apostles were the special forces of the post-resurrection world, Mary Magdalene was the chief of operations. In the Ethiopian tradition, her role isn't just a footnote, it's the cornerstone. While the Western world spent centuries trying to paint her as a repentant sinner, the Ethiopian Book of Mary and other hidden scrolls describe her as the woman who knew the all. In fact, these texts suggest that Jesus gave Mary a specific set of revelations that he didn't even share with the men, not because he was playing favorites, but because she was the only one with a high enough spiritual frequency to process them. The Ethiopian tradition calls her the apostle to the apostles. After the resurrection, when the men were still locked in rooms trembling with fear, Mary was already out in the garden, communicating with the luminous Jesus. The scrolls reveal that she was the first to master the language of the light body. While the men were asking about politics and when the kingdom would physically arrive on earth, Mary was asking about the ascension of the soul and the mechanics of the higher dimensions. Jesus allegedly told her, "Where your mind is, there your treasure is," and then proceeded to show her the 7 powers of the soul, a roadmap of how to overcome the ego. The shocking part of the Ethiopian perspective is that Mary actually had to explain the resurrection to the other apostles. She was the bridge between the physical and the divine. The texts describe a tense moment where Peter and some of the other disciples get jealous. They ask, "Why did he speak to her and not to us?" But Jesus defends her, stating that her heart was directed to the kingdom of heaven more than all her brothers. He saw her as the blueprint for the new humanity, someone who could balance the masculine and feminine energies to reach a state of total spiritual gnosis or knowledge. In the Ethiopian highlands, Mary isn't a symbol of shame, she's a symbol of the hidden wisdom. They believe she traveled to Africa after the ascension, carrying with her the secret gospel that Jesus whispered to her in the garden. This gospel supposedly contained the instructions on how to manifest the presence of the Holy Spirit through specific breathwork and meditation. She was the one who understood that the second coming wasn't a physical event in the sky, but a descending of the light into the hearts of individuals. By keeping Mary's true role alive, the Ethiopian Bible preserves a version of Christianity that is deeply intuitive and balanced. proving that the shattering truths of Jesus were first understood by a woman who wasn't afraid to look into the sun. This isn't just ancient history, though. It's a bridge between faith and the cutting edge of science. Modern implications. It's 2026, and we are finally hitting a point where our telescopes and particle accelerators are starting to catch up with what the Ethiopian monks have been saying for nearly 2,000 years. For a long time, the idea of light bodies, hidden dimensions, and words of power was laughed at as pure mysticism. But if you look at modern quantum physics, the overlap is getting a little too close for comfort. Scientists today talk about string theory, which suggests that the fundamental building blocks of our universe aren't little balls of matter, but tiny, vibrating strings of energy. Sound familiar? It's exactly what the Ethiopian Jesus was describing when he told his disciples that the world was built on holy resonances and that the soul needs to be tuned to the correct frequency. We're also starting to explore the concept of a holographic universe, the idea that our 3D reality is just a projection from a deeper 2D information layer. This mirrors the secret dialogue, where Jesus explains that the physical world is just a shadow of the treasury of light. When the Ethiopian Bible describes Jesus passing through stations or midst places, it sounds remarkably like what physicists call brain cosmology, where multiple parallel universes exist right on top of each other, separated only by a difference in vibration. We used to call these heavens, but today we call them dimensions. The label has changed, but the map remains the same. The shocking takeaway for us today is that these ancient texts treat consciousness as the primary force of the universe, not matter. In a world increasingly dominated by artificial intelligence and digital illusions, the Ethiopian message is a wake-up call. It suggests that we aren't just biological machines. We are points of light anchored in a physical frame. If the archons, or powers Jesus mentioned, are real, they look a lot like the modern systems that keep us distracted, fearful, and disconnected from our true potential. The cheat codes Jesus gave the apostles, the mantras, and the mental focus are more relevant than ever. They are tools for reclaiming our attention and our sovereignty in an age of total noise. Furthermore, the Ethiopian focus on the light body is finding a home in the study of biophotons, light particles emitted by the human body. Research is beginning to suggest that our DNA actually stores and communicates through light. If that's true, then the transformation Jesus spoke about might not have been a metaphor. It might have been a literal biological shift. We are moving toward a quantum theology, where the gap between the lab and the monastery is disappearing. The Ethiopian Bible isn't a dusty relic of the past, it's a manual for the future. It's telling us that we have the hardware for something much bigger than we've been led to believe. And it's time we finally learned how to use the software. So, where does this leave us? For centuries, the story of Jesus was edited, polished, and packaged to fit into a neat, controllable box. We were told the story ended at the tomb, or maybe with a brief wave goodbye from a hilltop. But the Ethiopian Bible stands as a defiant witness to a much larger, much weirder, and much more beautiful reality. It suggests that the good news wasn't just about a moral teacher, it was about a cosmic explorer who came back from the dead to hand us the keys to the prison cell. By preserving the missing 40 days and the secret conversations with Mary Magdalene, the monks of the Ethiopian highlands kept a fire burning that the rest of the world tried to blow out. We are living in an era where the old stories are starting to feel too small for our expanding understanding of the universe. We are looking at the stars and seeing billions of galaxies. We are looking at atoms and seeing infinite energy. We need a spirituality that is as big as the cosmos we're discovering, And that's exactly what these ancient scrolls provide. They offer a vision of a quantum Christ who isn't interested in your labels or your rituals, but in the frequency of your heart. He didn't come to start a religion. He came to start a revolution of consciousness, a way to die before you die, so that you can truly live. The shocking revelations found in the Ethiopian texts are only shocking because we've been told half the story for so long. When you look at the full 81 books, the picture changes. Jesus isn't just a savior. He's a guide. The afterlife isn't a destination. It's a journey. And you aren't a victim of circumstance. You are a being of light capable of navigating the very fabric of reality. The question is no longer whether these texts are true in a historical sense. The question is whether you are brave enough to test the tools they provide. Are you ready to tune your light body? Are you ready to speak the words of power? The Ethiopian Bible has been waiting 2,000 years for a generation that could finally understand its message. The mist is clearing, the scrolls are open, and the secret is finally out. The rest is up to you. The truth has been hidden in plain sight for 2 millennia, protected by the monks of Ethiopia. Now that the seal is broken, your journey is just beginning. If you're ready to dive deeper into the world's greatest mysteries, hit subscribe and join us. The light is calling. Don't get left behind.